Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience as we work through a little bit of technical difficulty this morning. Would like to welcome everybody to the IT Low Code webinar series, where we are talking about 2022 predictions and how the future of IT is low code. So let's kick off by meeting our speakers. Today, we are joined by Carlos Sima, who is the Vice President of Technology at SoftBank, and also Ananth Ava, who is President and COO of Pipefy. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning, Rochelle.
I am Rochelle Clark. I will be your moderator today. I'm the Director of Corporate Marketing for Pipefy. I do want to invite everybody on the line to submit any questions that you might have through our chat tool, and we will make every effort to answer and respond to most of those on the end of the session today. But first, I want to give everybody an opportunity to meet our speakers. So gentlemen, if you could each take a moment to kind of introduce yourselves and let everybody know why you're here today. Carlos, why don't we kick off with yourself?
Sure. So I'm Carlos Sima. I'm originally from Brazil. I'm currently the lead of the technology discipline at the operating group at SoftBank Latin America. And before that, I was CTO of Linio, an e-commerce company in Latin America. And I came from Rocket Internet, which was the founder of Linio. I spent 3 years there as CTO for Latin America as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Carlos. And Ananth, how about yourself?
Yeah, Carlos, welcome. Thanks for taking the time today. My name is Ananth. I'm the president here at Pipefy. Really excited to be here. I would say I've spent the better half of my career either working with or optimizing or dealing with some sort of workflow. So whether it be in the work management space or this space. So really excited to be here and have this chat.
Excellent. Thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to be here and join us today. So I would have to say that if there is a single word that we heard more than any other word in 2021, low code has to be at the top of the list. And we're seeing more and more companies come out with low code solutions. But before we really dive into the nitty gritty here, we all have this perception that everyone is joining this low code game. So why don't we talk about what low code isn't? Ananth, do you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, I think what low code isn't is there's sort of a framework of what is an application. So an application, if you want to build an application, you need a GUI, you need a database, and you need some sort of business logic. And you need all three components to be able to actually build an application to do some sort of a platform. So from my perspective, what low code isn't is something that doesn't actually have those three things. Because if you're just doing simple routing or you're doing simple actions, from my perspective, you're not building an end-to-end application. You're maybe doing one piece of those three pillars. And so I've always articulated that low code application platforms actually allow you to build apps, and those three components are necessary for the platform to contain, to be able to leverage and go through it. But Carlos, I'd love to get your perspective, right? Because you're obviously much more closer to the problem as the IT lead.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I mean, for an application, it does have to have some type of storage to record the state of the application, and of course the business logic, and an interface to deal with whoever the client is. Sometimes is a GUI for an end user. Sometimes it's an API to connect with other systems. So it depends on what the case is. And I mean, there's many different low code platforms nowadays, and I agree with you. Some of them are just like tools that can automate simple processes. And I mean, in my point of view, also that does not qualify as an application.
And Carlos, I would love to just kind of double click, since you have that much deeper kind of developer perspective. What are developers really valuing in low code solution? This whole buy versus build concept, what benefits are low code bringing to the developer set?
Well, from my experience, I mean, I don't know many developers who rely on low code solutions to build applications. One case that I can think of top of my head is prototyping. Sometimes would you use some type of tools to create prototypes for MVPs or for some new features or new products that we try to launch, but not in a, let's say, in a production setting. But I think the biggest value for developers in low-code solutions is to allow other people to join in. I mean, everyone knows that there's a worldwide shortage on developers, and I mean, a lot of developers are overworked. I mean, companies are understaffed in this regard, and I think low-code solutions can help remove some burden out of developers and move them to who really use the application. In some ways, this is really beneficial because you can cut the middleman as you empower, let's say, ordinary users, non-developers, let's call it, to do their own, to create their own applications. I think they can come up with much better solutions than if they have to talk to product managers, and then product managers have to talk to developers. And then in the end, it might not be exactly what the customer really wanted. So I think depending on the tool, if it makes it easy for regular business users to create their applications according to their needs, I think this is a plus for developers. I don't think developers see this as a threat. I don't think low code or no code will replace developing anytime soon. I think coding will be there for a long time, at least during my lifespan. But I think it can complement, for some use cases, it can really complement the work that developers do. And some of these, I think developers would find boring to do, like forms and like basic CRUD applications that just do like input and retrieval from a database. So I think that helps developers get the best type of challenges that they want. I mean, they don't need to spend time doing same mode. They can just focus on what only them can do, and I think that's much more interesting for developers.
Yeah, just to dovetail off of that, one thing I would say is there's also lines between sort of developers and non-developers. And I think one of the key terms that we're hearing more and more of is citizen development or business technologists, especially in either driving digital transformation efforts or driving hyper automation efforts in organizations. And one thing, what we've seen, certainly in our platform, is there's basically like 4 personas. So HR operations, finance operations, customer operations, and IT. All 4 of them participate, but the bridge between sort of non-technical users or these citizen developers or business technologists and IT is closing, meaning they'll never be a developer and they'll never obviously replace a developer, but the deeper understanding of security, trying to understand business logic, rules, okay, like I shouldn't do that because that's going to expose a lot of IP to external parties, and managing risk. There is increased awareness, certainly not as heightened as an IT person. So IT will ultimately always own the governance. But when I was in school, everyone said, hey, like everyone's going to be a data scientist and data analyst in some capacity. And I think in the world of the future, there's always going to be a technical component that embeds itself as knowledge workers continue to evolve in their skill set. So it's an exciting time. I think there's a bridge that definitely needs to connect those 2 folks, but at least the distance is getting closer and closer and closer than it's ever been before.
Yeah, the 2 of you raise a really good point here, and kind of the delta, right? Because there's a lot of paradigms under this umbrella for low code. So I would love to just kind of drill down into a little bit of, you know, what deployment and adoption really of low code solutions, how that differs between what we're saying the developer and Ananth, you're saying the non-developer or the citizen developer. What might that look like? And Carlos, what might the resistance be, do you think, from the developer set to adopt and deploy low-code solutions?
Yeah, I think Ananth touched on a very good point. I mean, sometimes points like security and privacy gets overlooked when you don't have the experience of building applications. And I think it's very important that IT plays a role in this space as well, even low code. I mean, from my experience, what usually happens in companies, and I've been in several startups, is that, I mean, because there are not enough resources, be it developers, money, time, whatever it is, people will try to solve their problems in any way they can. So marketing has to do something and relies on IT, but IT is so busy building the front end, building a new feature, that they cannot really help. And so other areas in the company will start trying to find their own solutions. And that starts a big problem that is now known as a shadow IT, is applications and systems that IT is not aware of, that is running on the company or on a SaaS basis, that exposes company data and company processes. And I think if IT can regulate this by adopting a tool that it can manage, that it can guarantee that it will be safe, it won't expose any information, it will be secure, that business users can use to create their solutions. I mean, to build this gap between what they demand and what IT has to offer. I think that could be a good thing, because what I think, I mean, at least when I was a CTO, what pissed me off the most was to find out months later that marketing is using this type of tool, that we really never tested it, that we don't know if it's safe or not. We haven't really, I mean, certified the tool to be used. And I understand marketing. I mean, they're in goodwill, they're being proactive, trying to solve the issues, but at the same time, they are maybe creating a bigger issue in the future. So I think if IT can sign off on a tool that can make it easier for the user, but at the same time can guarantee this level of security, this level of privacy that a corporate solution demands, I think that's a win-win situation.
So what I'm hearing, oh, I'm sorry, Ananth, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rochelle.
So what I'm hearing is that it's not that developers are so against low-code applications. It's just that IT or development wants a seat at the table to really sign off on the security of those tools. Am I understanding that correctly, Carlos?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think IT has a lot to gain, like developers have a lot to gain with the adoption of low-code for, as I said, for some use cases. I don't think, I mean, low-code, at least now, is not a solution for all problems. You cannot create like a whole e-commerce system using low-code, but for what it is useful for the use cases that it can do a good job, I think it's something that developers will appreciate.
Makes sense. And Ananth, working with the business as you mentioned you have a deep background in, kind of developing workflows and working a bit more with the business. Are you seeing tighter alignment between business and IT, especially as, more and more business end users are trying to solve some of these problems on their own?
Yeah, I think one of the shifts that I've seen is businesses, the number of, and let me back up, like the number of breaches and cybersecurity threats in the surface area of cybersecurity threats has grown exponentially. I don't think there is an organization out there that does not have most of its knowledge workers go through some sort of a security training. So Good news is the awareness has certainly risen. Now, is everyone an expert in trying to understand that and combat that? Absolutely not. So I think to Carlos's point, I understand the frustration because one attack and one breach can pretty much put an end to the business, right? So knowing this, what I am seeing is even on the business side, as long as there's an IT arm that's definitely progressive and both parties can agree on a governance model. We've certainly talked about different governance models like a privateer model, a democratic approach, or a federated approach where you set up centers of excellence for your citizen developers and your IT folks to collaborate. And that's key. I think the RACI model, like who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed, is extremely important to put in any organization, whether you're deploying a low-code tool or you're deploying any type of application, period, right? So what we're seeing is a lot more organizations as part of their procurement process or as part of their technology adoption process. They may not realize it, but they are building some sort of a basic governance framework in place and getting those centers of excellence set up. I think for citizen development, we definitely advocate, even when we're talking on the business side, to get as a bridge into the IT side. In fact, with all of our sales teams, that's the first thing that we say, because ultimately, if we don't do that and we don't have the IT buy-in and the tool is deployed, we're going to churn. Because if IT has not endorsed it and they don't have a good understanding or appreciation of both the governance and the security measures that are embedded, and also non-security and non-governance measures. Sometimes for IT, they're also trying to manage redundant tools. They're trying to build a tech stack that's rational for the organization. We definitely want to co-create that with IT. So we actually even train the business person to then go and build a bridge to IT, because ultimately that's where that's the department or that's the persona that's going to own the budget and actually own the vision and the roadmap of how to deploy, especially flexible tools like ours. So for me, yeah, I definitely see a lot more understanding, especially with some of the security challenges and other things that have come through. And the only other thing, and Carlos already said it, which is, while it may not be perfect for every single situation, the alternative, which is people doing spreadsheets, email, whatever that they do, is far worse, like in terms of data breach and other issues. So I think we also owe it to both the business side and the IT side to educate them on, hey, but look at the status quo, right? That is, well, that is definitely not perfect, right? So we have to move faster and build basic prototypes and continue to iterate to the ideal governance model as we go through the evolution. And IT understands that. So they generally move fast as long as they're in, at least in the C and the I column in the RACI model, to make sure that there's no surprises.
And just to complement, from my experience working in several startups, the sooner you do this, the better, because like these business processes tend to be overlooked until much later, and it's much easier to solve them, or at least to standardize, organize them when you're small and then build with it. Then later on, when you have several challenges and you're growing a lot and you have a lot of competitors, and then you try to organize your company. I've been through this. It's not easy to do this because there's always an emergency. There's always another priority. So for startups, I think the earlier you start, even like if you launch with processes already organized, it's much better, because I mean, I know you're going to pivot a lot of times. You're going to change the way you do things. But if you need to communicate to everyone, guys, I mean, this is the new process. This is how we do things now. I mean, that will create a lot of friction in communication. So if you have all your process already centralized in a tool that as you grow and you want to optimize a few things, then you can do this without having to communicate to everyone or to get someone's approval, then it's much better. I mean, I've seen companies do that from the beginning. I mean, to be honest, in the beginning, it takes a little bit of, let's say, power from the company because they have to focus on this. But over time, they overtake, and I mean, they grow much faster, and they are much more productive because, I mean, all these communication issues that happens when you are relying on Excel, on email, and everything to run your processes, I think that that gives you a big boost later on. So I think my advice from my times of Rocket and Linio is that the sooner you organize your company, the sooner you document your processes and you put this on a tool that can enforce them, the better.
Thanks, Carlos. And I'm hearing you say a lot, when talking about low code, as you're starting up, startups, as you're kind of getting going. And when I think about kind of low code tools and even the vendors who were selling low code solutions, I do think about smaller, more agile organizations. But, how are you seeing bigger companies like Microsoft, like SAP, and kind of these bigger enterprises who have a history of more monolithic platforms? How are you seeing them jump on this low code trend?
I think there's always been this void in workflow, right? I mean, if you look at tools like Microsoft Office or Google G Suite, I mean, they have a lot of things, but only recently they have stepped into this arena, and I think that means something. That means that companies see this as a space that needs to be filled. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have Excel, Word, etc., or even Teams that you can communicate, but you don't have a tool that organizes all of these processes. So I think they're late to the game. I think they realized much later than I would like to, because I would love to have a solution embedded into the Office suite that I purchased, a tool that could do this. But I think they see this as a trend that is picking up in big corporations and small corporations. Everyone is seeing the value of this now. So I think BPA is something that companies are adopting in a much faster pace than before, and I think they see this as a trend, and they want to seize the opportunity to sell more software, so and to keep the users in their platform. So because if they have to go outside to create this workflow, I mean, this is revenue that they're not putting on their baseline. So I think they are seizing more profits, and they see the opportunity, and they are trying to take it.
Makes sense. Anant, thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I think it's, at least as it relates to some of the larger enterprises, they're quite sophisticated. I think one of the most common things that we are seeing is this notion of the innovations team that's branching out under the CIO office. And that team is actually starting to build what we would consider that center of excellence, or the business practice of bringing IT, developers, non-developers, business technologists, citizens, executives together in a room to drive and accelerate digital transformation. Many tools out there, and I actually still think that the TAM is so massive that between Microsoft, Google, Amazon, all the way to like the RPA vendors, all the way to ServiceNow, and all the way to companies like Pipefy, there's a lot of things to solve, and solve very quickly. And as a simple example, a solution like ours, or even Microsoft or Google or others, they'll never integrate into mainframe. So you need an RPA process to actually go and read that data and pull that data into a modern stack, and then drive some sort of a workflow logic. So I think it's definitely not a one-shot or one-size-fits-all problems. There's a lot of adaptation, and I think having the right toolkit is what these centers of innovation and centers of excellence are trying to build, to ensure that they're prioritizing the right things to drive the digital transformation and the hyper automation efforts in their organization. And I will say it's really interesting to see some of the research where, especially for large companies, and when you think about the Fortune 500 to 1,000, if I think the percentage is like 70 to 75% of those companies will go out of business unless they embrace and really get into the effort of putting digital transformation at their forefront, especially with all the things that are happening with COVID and new normal. So it will be interesting. I think it will continue to accelerate. I do think the mega players like the Microsofts and Googles will definitely play a big role in helping us get through this, but there's a lot of work to be done and not enough time and not enough resources and not enough specific tools to get all of those nuances covered in a short period.
Right, that makes sense. And you touched on of this big rush for digital transformation. And I think what I'm hearing from both of you is the organizations who are selling tools and platforms are just as we're just as impacted as the folks who are trying to digitally transform. Can we talk a little bit about the low code trends that you think are driving some of these movements?
Yeah, happy to go first. I think Carlos already touched on this. There's a massive shortage of developers, and also I think the sophistication of developers is evolving where they want to tackle the quote unquote hard problems, right, that are hitting the business. So you have fewer of them, and the few that you do have are very focused on mission critical tools and applications for the company's top line. Then on top of that, you're seeing an escalation of whether it be back office or front office needs, where either someone has to come in and bridge the solution with a vertical application that might be very expensive, or looking to things like low-code application platforms to ensure that the organization maintains its agility and flexibility without compromising security and compliance. So it's unfortunately, at least as humanity, the perfect storm, right? Where now you're forced to go very fast and get into the digital transformation effort. But irrespective of the number of universities and coding schools out there, there's just not going to be the number of developers, at least for the foreseeable future, like the next 5 years to a decade. But it is almost necessary because for companies to adapt and getting into solving either the big problems or the back office problems, everyone's now stepping up to be that quote unquote citizen technologist or business technologist or citizen developer to help augment IT and accelerate some of those efforts. So I think that's where low code application platforms have that appeal, because as a knowledge worker, you feel you are actually helping your organization and your team move faster, and whether it be prototyping, whether it be building back office applications, or whether it be mission critical applications. Like we have some hospitals that use us to do simple things like COVID testing before folks come into the check-in for a doctor, right? Just having that agility in the absence of nothing is very powerful. So that's definitely a trend that I'm seeing. Is there's just a lot, there's a huge hole and a big hole in that digital layer, and there's a lot of work that needs to happen to bridge that gap very quickly.
That's awesome.
One other trend that I see that plays in favor of low code is the adoption of APIs for companies. I mean, even in their mission critical systems, I think the trend nowadays, the modern trend, is to create applications based on microservices. And these microservices communicate via APIs. And I think the existence of these APIs make even, more sense for low code, because in a low code tool, if you have all these services in your company available through APIs, it makes it much easier as well to orchestrate all of these APIs using a low code tool to create processes, to create applications. So I think low code is also getting some tailwind from these API adoptions within companies. because it gives them much more power than before, where you would have to live with whatever features it would come out of the box when in the platform. Now, if your low-code tool can call an API, call an endpoint, and send a payload and receive a payload back, then I mean the opportunities or the power is endless, because whatever you cannot do within your low-code tool, if your IT team has developed an API that can do this business function, then you can use it inside your low-code tool without any friction at all. So I think the adoption of APIs by companies is also a big push for low-code.
Thanks, Carlos. All right, let's get into the good stuff. The reason many of our viewers are here today, let's start talking a little bit about predictions. So I'd love to open it up to both of you and just hear a bit about what you think what are your top 3 predictions for 2022?
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, there's a big difference between 2020 and 2022, which is the onset of COVID, and now I guess the second iteration, which is the Omicron variant that we're fighting. And the difference is the first time we went through that together as humanity, very reactive, very unclear, mixed feelings. Oh, like the remote work thing will never last, or people will be back in offices in a couple of months, etc. I was even reading an article this morning with Amazon CEO saying, hey, we thought this would be over and this would be behind us in 2022, but that's not the case. And I would say what's different about 2022 is A, we've learned from our experiences, and B, I think as opposed to being reactive and shooting from the hip, we're now going into a much more of a proactive world. And some of the things that Carlos outlined, which is, okay, we need to do some of the hard work, right? Of putting together, whether you're a large company like innovation centers, or if you're a small company, let's start building basic governance frameworks to see how do we make decisions as an organization, not just for low code, but in general. That is continuing to change and accelerate. But the good news about 2022 is I think we're being much more thoughtful and thinking about not just the next 6 months or a year, but we're thinking about, okay, this is how we need to adapt and operate. The second thing is the notion of great resignation and the war for talent is hotter than it's ever been before, especially for knowledge workers and especially for developers, where the digital transformation, building that software layer for whatever you're doing continues to accelerate. And now the war has gone global, right? So it used to be that everyone has to be in that HQ or near the hubs, but now the access to talent is everywhere. And so the best and brightest will be found by the right recruiters. So I think that trend is actually going to continue to accelerate as companies adapt to the new normal and embrace either remote or a hybrid ecosystem. And I think as it relates to sort of this conversation, Pipefy, that shortage of talent will probably persist. And the fact that there's a new normal and there's a need to build like a lot of these quick applications to give the Amazon-like experience when an employee is coming through an onboarding process, or build a very good ecosystem to curate procurement and do supply chain management. IT is definitely going to be the center of power and the center of governance and compliance to ensure that those efforts for digital transformation and hyper automation are prioritized. But IT is going to look for citizen developers, business technologists to really help accelerate some of this, where they'll do the risk reward matrix and then quickly start assigning roles and responsibilities for folks to build those experiences. So I think it'll be an interesting 5 years. There'll be and that's my prediction for 2022. I think it's not like, okay, 2022 is done and 2023, we've gone back to a state of normal. There'll always be a rediscovery and iterations, and the companies that can adapt the fastest to it and have the right digital footprint and layer will probably win. The companies who are too slow to adapt to it will probably struggle in the next decade, 5 years to a decade.
I mean, got my crystal ball here. So I think my number one prediction is the same as Anant. I think it's the most obvious, but also I think the most important is that this tech talent war will intensify. I mean, it will become much more aggressive, and that will drive more people to low code solutions. I think every solution, be it low code, be it developer, like something that can increase developer productivity, will be a good bet for 2022, because I mean, as you have less developers and more to do, I think you need to find solutions that to bridge this gap. I think another thing that I think Anant also talked about, I think we'll see a consolidation of this hybrid work model. I mean, several companies in our portfolio already adopted this. I mean, there's no more the need to go to the office. You can go if you want to, but you're not required to do so. Some companies adopt like a flexible work schedule, like you have 3 days in the office and 2 at home. But I mean, I think this is here to stay. People loved it when they were required to do this because of the pandemic, and I think they are not willing to let this go. I think that this is something that is here to stay, and I think this plays a role for tools that organize the work, because I mean, if you're not there in person anymore and you cannot like talk to them or do things like you used to do in the past, like you find a way. I think if people work in different time zones, or if they work in separate places, you need to, I mean, you have a greater need to organize things. I mean, you cannot rely on physical communication, on cooler conversations, water cooler conversations to get things done. I think that creates a need for something to really organize so that remote teams can work together in an efficient way. Otherwise, it will be total chaos. And I think another thing that I see as a big trend, I mean, that's been growing a lot in the past years, is serverless computing. So I think I see this like a stage one. It was a cloud with VMs. So you no longer deploy on your bare metal computer in a location at a data center. Now you can spin off a virtual machine in a matter of minutes and have your application going, running there. Then we saw the, let's say, container revolution, and you can deploy your applications running on containers and Kubernetes and all that. And I see a lot more companies relying on serverless, that you don't need containers, you don't need a computer anymore. You can just create your function and have it available. And I think this also is a push for low code, because if you look at it, low code is like a serverless application as well. You can create your snippet of code in there and have it run whenever that event happens. So I think as developers get more used to the idea of serverless computing, of not having an application deployed on a machine or even on a container anymore, that they see this as a collection of functions that together create this system, I think they will be more receptive to the idea of low code, because that's what it is in the end. I mean, it's an environment where you run functions, be it small or big, that that can do the job. So I would love to see these things merge in the future, so that it becomes not a low code or high code or whatever code you want. I mean, if you want no code, you can do everything no code. But if you need more specialization, if you need more features, that you can, I mean, integrate with these serverless platforms, that you can code in whatever language you feel comfortable with, and then you can get the job done. So I think it will be like a spectrum of code, not low code or high code. I mean, it'll be whatever code you want. I mean, if you're into writing more code, you can do that. If you're not, if you can do what you need to do without writing a lot of code, you can do that as well. So I think serverless is something that we see nowadays for very specific use cases. I would say especially for data consumption. So if you have a data pipeline that you need to do some transformation, or you need to insert this in any type of tool, we see a lot of serverless in there. But up until now, we haven't seen a lot of companies just relying on serverless. And we do have a couple companies in our portfolio that are 100% serverless now. So I see this picking up, and I think this will be also a very good trend that will power low code in the future.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I do want to play a bit of devil's advocate here and call out maybe some of the themes that we're hearing that maybe were not addressed in your predictions. So maybe a few counter predictions. And so I know there's this, we've talked a lot about low code. Carlos, you've touched a little bit on no code, but there is this fallacy of no code, right? And some of the analyst sets are saying nothing is truly no code. Everything is low code. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts on this fallacy of no code and what you think about that.
I mean, you're right. I mean, in the end, everything is built on code. I mean, I don't know an application nowadays that is built on low code that can create other applications. So I'm sure Pipefy has millions of lines of code that will enable users to not use code. But the problem is, I mean, it's low code from the perspective of the user, not, I mean, of course there is code in there, but I mean, if you want to build an application, then it's low code. And I mean, this is no news. I mean, if you look at the past, things like Microsoft Access decades ago, that you could build forms and you can use VB script to do some automation. That was like the beginnings of low code. And then WordPress, that you can build a website and use plugins to create all of your solutions. So I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, of course, there's code in the back, but I mean, if you see this from the perspective of the user, then it's low code, and I think that's what matters. It's when you want to build something that you can leverage what somebody has already coded, and you need to recode again. I mean, if you make an analogy with real coding, that's what libraries are for as well. And when you build an application, you don't start from scratch. You have a framework. You use a lot of libraries that you don't need to recode. So, I mean, that's just another layer of abstraction that is put on top to make it easier for non-developers to create their own solutions. And I think that's welcome from the developer perspective, because as I said before, this complements what developers need to do and frees them to do boring work and having them focused on more interesting stuff to build.
Excellent. Anant, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's more of a abstraction layer more than anything else, right? Which is ultimately, it's from the user perspective. The one thing I would say is there's definitely, we're starting to see this separation of how you describe a platform, again, from a user's perspective, not just in terms of low code, no code, but also, okay, this is like the low code tool for AI. This is a low code tool for our database. This is a low code tool for this. I mean, one would argue even Excel is actually a low code tool because ultimately it's just a UI UX layer off of which you can do a lot of things. So I think there's this notion of, we'll try to get you to your answer faster by introducing abstraction layers for both developers and non-developers. But I think the difference now is because the abstraction layers have gotten so good, people who are non-developers, or what we consider completely outside the realm of any type of syntax or even basic coding with some basic drag and drop, they are actually able to accommodate some very basic business applications for their very, very specific nuanced use cases where it may not be worth the time, the energy of doing a full bottoms up build. So I think it's more of a abstraction layer, and it's actually allowing a lot of folks who traditionally would not be able to participate in the digital transformation revolution to now at least contribute in their own capacity for their use cases.
And how about the fallacy that low code won't replace development? Carlos, you've talked a little bit about this, and from your perspective, Ananth, I think you've touched on it a little bit as well, but let's dig into that just a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think low code won't replace development, or let's say high code development anytime soon, but it will replace in a few use cases that I think it is even more suitable for. I think for businesses processes, I mean, who better knows the processes than the users that are going to use this? So if they have a way that they can create the application, just like doing a document, because I mean, if you see it in a way, creating an application, doing drag and drop, and you create the workflow, it's basically, it seems like you're doing the documentation, but in the end you have the application. So instead of documenting the application, sending it through a product manager and then to developers, get things done, etc., if they can do that, that's better. And I think, I mean, they will coexist. I mean, developers will be there for a long time and doing all kinds of work, but I think you have to use the right tool for the job. And if you have something that you can use that will save time, that will save developer time, and will produce even better results than doing it yourself from scratch, I mean, why not use it? I mean, this is a big shift. Like looking back at my career, that's a big mindset shift that I have to go through when I became CTO. Because I mean, as a developer, there was nothing that I couldn't do. I mean, like, oh, we need CRM, let's do it. I mean, let's build our own. We need an ERP, we can do it. And I mean, when you're faced with, trade-offs, like either I do ERP or I create a new feature at the store, then I was like, okay, let's buy the ERP, let's buy. And I mean, that was a big shift for me, that I started seeing the value of using third-party solutions to complement my team. So the way I saw it is like, if I could, instead of developing my CRM and using 10 people on my development team to do that, if I could buy something in the market that could do the same thing, I saw this as hiring 10 developers. So if you change your mindset and you can leverage what other people have already built and focus on your core business, on only you can build, and leave all the other things for third parties that can not only build but maintain it in a better way that you could. I think that is a big gain for any company. So my advice is like, focus on your core business, on what nobody else could do but yourself, and try to fill all the other areas with whatever you can find in the market that will fit your needs.
Yeah, I'll perhaps be a little controversial. I think low code will not replace developers in a traditional sense, but MIT actually has done a great study on talking about future of work. But work that someone may have been doing before, as Carlos articulated, will get replaced, right? So if developers were doing something, even like QA tests and doing basic things that would have been done manually, but now there's applications to help accelerate those things and make life easier, it'll definitely step in. I think some of the examples are an accountant used to do manual journal entries 10 years ago. Now the role of the accountant itself has changed radically, where they won't do debits and credits. There are systems that orchestrate that, but they're more in expert decision making and doing more complex things. So I think similarly, I would say there are things that developers probably do today that are not either particularly value adding or very time consuming, that can either be automated or pushed to either low code applications or citizen developers as they continue to evolve and they continue to go and progress in terms of complexity. And I also think as business technologists or citizen developers, their roles change. They will start adopting these tools to give them more power in terms of building applications and getting more specialized. Like Salesforce, for example, okay, started off as a CRM, now Salesforce Lightning has basic workflow applications on the back end that can enable you to do basic low code development, right? So there's it's an evolution. It's not black and white. I think sometimes some of the press makes it seem like it's a black and white, but I think what we're really talking about is the continuous evolution of knowledge workers and professionals, and the shift that we're seeing as more and more of us have to participate in digital transformation to drive relevancy for our roles as professionals.
Excellent. Thank you. We're coming up to the last 5 minutes, gentlemen. So I would love to just give both of you an opportunity to share any final thoughts on the topic as we're wrapping up. Carlos, anything from you?
So first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's been great to talk about this very important subject. And I think, since it's the future of low code, I think I see it's bright. I mean, I see a lot of people joining this trend, and I think companies have a lot to gain by getting it sooner within their, let's say, life. I mean, the sooner you organize your processes, the better. So my advice for those who are reticent about whether to adopt it or not, I think it's something that I think your developers will appreciate if you do this and having them focus on things that they find more useful than creating forms and CRUD applications. So I think it's something that we'll see a lot more in the future.
Thank you, Carlos. Ananth, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think likewise, we're here to help. So certainly feel free to reach out to us, and either through a free trial or even one of our AEs or even myself. So definitely here to help you and your businesses accelerate some of the digital transformation initiatives that you may have and take a more consultative approach to that process. I'd also say, please stay safe. It's wild out there. There's not a day that goes by that I don't hear of another friend or colleague who's unfortunately had some run-ins with the continuing evolution of the virus. So definitely that would be sort of my two big takeaways.
Thank you, Anand. Thanks to both of you again for joining us today. Very much appreciate your time spent here. And thank you to everyone on the line who has joined the webinar. If you have any questions, you can send them to myself, rochelle.clark@pipefy.com. My email address is in the chat. So please send any and all questions and we can send them along to either Carlos or Anant to get those answered up for you. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy. See you next time. Bye-bye.
See you.
Bye-bye.